Unto every person there is a name. Today we gather to remember the victims of the Holocaust, known in Hebrew as the Shoah. By reciting the names of individuals alongside biographical information, we give names back to those who were stripped of their identities before they were robbed of their lives. We remember that each victim was an individual, a son or a daughter, a sister or a brother, with their own hopes and dreams for the future. We know each of these individuals brought their own unique light into the world, a light extinguished far too soon by the darkness of the Nazis. We, the living, bear witness today. Together, we affirm that the innocent lives lost will never be forgotten, as we join communities around the world in remembering the victims of the Holocaust. B'nai B'rith International and Yad Vashem coordinate this name-reading program in the United States. Most of the names we remember today are supplied by Yad Vashem. However, to show why the Holocaust touched each of us personally, we also read names submitted by members of our local community. Joining us to read these names are elected officials from across the region, as well as students from Gesher Jewish Day School, Berman Hebrew Academy, Milton Gottesman Jewish Day School, and Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School. By speaking these names, we restore to these individuals their human and familial identities and ensure they are never reduced to a number. Yehi zichronam livracha, may their memories be a blessing.
Sipra Eisenberg, age 35, lived in France, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Rafal Eisenberg, age 38, lived in France, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Albert Glazel, age 63, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Cornelia Reichfeld, age 61, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Ada Suez, age 32, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Bronia Rosemarin, age 37, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Volka Rosemarin, age 65, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Pina Shine, age 42, lived in Belgium, died 1942 in Lille, France. Bella Haguel, age 25, lived in Greece, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Victoria Abulafia, age 28, lived in Greece, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Pera Gilden, age 18, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Kraslova, Latvia. Samuel Sternin, age 60, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Pinchos Gilden, age 55, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Kraslova, Latvia. Hinda Blobstein, age 42, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Shmuel Spivak, age 43, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Leah Spivak, age 36, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Chaim Gordon, age 41, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Kraslova, Latvia. Rosa Friedman, age 51, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Shander Friedman, age 49, lived in Hungary, died 1945 in Auschwitz. Aranka Bitterman, age 30, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz.
Stefania Polak, age 58, lived in Poland, died August 1st, 1942 in Warsaw, Poland. Marisha Pikowski, age 43, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Aishishuk, Poland. Esther Pirovich, age 30, lived in Poland, died 1940 in Warszawa, Poland. Kana Koina, age 46, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Warszawa, Poland. Yankel Pirovich, age 46, lived in Poland, died 1940 in Varsovia, Poland. Meyer Pirovich, age 36, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Varsovia, Poland. Moshke Pirovich, age 72, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Warsaw, Poland. Bluma Paisht, age 60, lived in Poland, died July 5th, 1941 in Jastrzębie, Poland. Yenta Paisht, age 32, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Kropivnik, Poland. Israel Paist, age 32, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Ukraine. Sarah Paist, age 27, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Jastrzębie, Poland. Eva Pepper, age 63, lived in Netherlands, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Philip Pepper, age 65, lived in Netherlands, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Berta Placek, age 42, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Meluk Placek, age 45, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Minika Pravidlo, age 48, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Kalushin, Poland. Toba Pristin, age 68, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Moshe Pristin, age 68, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Zhenya Prenska, age 48, lived in Poland, died February 1st, 1944 in Białystok, Poland. Sua Shigoda, age 60, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz.
Hedwig Teutsch, age 25, lived in Germany, died November 30th, 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Hinda Kirschenbaum, age 59, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Jakob Tenenbaum, age 45, lived in Poland, died December 12, 1944 in Mauthausen. Jonas Tenenbaum, age 47, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Lwów, Poland. Nathan Triepveda, age 66, lived in Austria, died 1944 in Italy. Judith Yoskowicz, age 60, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Lodz, Poland. Samuel Katz, age 59, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Boryslaw, Poland. Samuel Katz, age 42, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Belzec. Shandor Katz, age 42, lived in Roshovo, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Esther Cohen, age 49, lived in Netherlands, died October 12, 1942 in Auschwitz. Bluma Kohn, age 58, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Lodz, Poland. Marie Cohen, age 43, lived in Greece, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Roland Cohen, age 22, lived in Athens, died 1944 in Germany. Jacek Kohn, age 56, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Leah Kohn, age 50, lived in Hungary, died May 1st, 1944 in Auschwitz. Jana Laub, age 61, lived in Poland, died 1940 in Auschwitz. Nenny Lazar, age 25, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Majdanek. Erno Lautmann, age 46, lived in Banya, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Berta Lublina, age 65, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Zawi, Stad Poland. Naftali Mer, age 37, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Nadworna Ghetto.
Israel Prizgoda, age 60, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Aaron Faust, age 67, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Sendizau, Poland. Rachel Fang, age 50, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Belzec. Hermina Tufel, age 71, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Adolf Farkas, age 38, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Germany. Edith Farkas, age 44, lived in Romania, died June 1, 1944 in Auschwitz. Lily Farkas, age 32, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Usair Folkenflig, age 25, lived in Romania, died July 1, 1941 in Novoselica, Romania. Rachmel Folkenflik, age 52, lived in Poland, died October 1, 1943 in Treblinka. Grisha Fudiman, aged 30, lived in USSR, died May 1, 1942 in Vigvosi, Ukraine, USSR. Yoina Fudiman, age 43, lived in USSR, died August 1, 1941 in Vigvosi, Ukraine, USSR. Shmuel Fudiman, age 18, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Dunayets, Ukraine, USSR. Hertz Futriki, age 39, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Slonim Ghetto. Hein Fuchs, age 22, lived in Poland, died August 22, 1942 in Sarnaki, Poland. Lieb Fuchs, age 62, lived in Poland, died 1940 in Otwock, Poland. Ephraim Furman, age 18, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Transnistria. Rivka Finger, age 30, lived in Poland, died January 1, 1939 in Poland. Anshel Kamil, age 30, lived in Austria, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Shlomo Kirschen, age 52, lived in Austria, died 1943 in Zbaro, Poland. Jenny Rappaport, age 42, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Belzec.
Carol Markle, age 51, lived in Poland, died August 8, 1941 in Lwów, Poland. Abe Furman, age 41, lived in USSR, died 1944 in Lelkilci, Poles, Belarusia. Joseph Altignac, age 53, lived in Germany, died July 28, 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia. Sigmund Altignac, age 52, lived in Germany, died July 28, 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia, USSR. Jacob Altignac, age 42, lived in Germany, died July 28, 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia, USSR. Kana Kanzler, age 34, lived in the USSR, died March 23, 1943 in Minsk, Belarusia, USSR. Moshe Muka, age 28, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Majinik. Boris Litvin, age 19, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Stalingrad, Russia. Gershon Pele, age 58, lived in USSR, died November 7, 1941 in Babruysk, Nogalev, Belarusia. Beryl Figler, age 58, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Tiraspol, Moldavia, Asra, Ukraine. Anna Tepfer, age 48, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. David Davidovitz, age 51, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Margaret Davidovitz, age 36, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Saint Mark, age 39, lived in USSR, died December 15th, 1943 in Kirovograd, Ukraine. Israel Sonis, age 40, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Smolensk, Russia. Herman Hirsch, aged 61, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Waliska, Krakow, Poland. Salomia Hirsch, age 60, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Waliszka, Krakow, Poland. Maximilian Margulies, age 48, lived in Poland, died 1945 in Matheson. Ludwika Birnbaum, age 36, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Treblinka.
Victor Schwarz, age 60, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Buczak, Poland. Regina Statfeld, age 62, lived in Poland, died August 1st, 1942 in Gorlica, Poland. Fajga Stein, age 21, lived in Pakenau, died 1942 in Belzec. Sidonie Stein, age 90, lived in Austria, died 1940 in Yugoslavia. Rose Steinberg, age 55, lived in Germany, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Chaza Steinloff, age 43, lived in Poland, died September 1st, 1942 in Belzec. Hava Sterenberg, age 36, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Transnistria. Jacob Shmulevich, age 61, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Lowicz, Poland. Jacob Goldman, age 29, lived in Poland, died February 8th, 1942 in Arkhangelsk, Russia, USSR. Eleonora Amarachi, age 48, lived in Greece, died April 1st, 1943 in Auschwitz. Suzanne Amarachi, age 24, lived in Greece, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Solomon Amarachi, age 30, lived in Greece, died April 1st, 1943 in Auschwitz. Prosper Araus, age 20, lived in France, died September 23rd, 1942 in Auschwitz. Ferenc Ungar, age 21, lived in Yugoslavia, died 1945 in Auschwitz. Rachel Uzerowicz, age 63, lived in Poland, died October 1st, 1942 in Piotrkow, Trubunalski, Poland. Fanny Ickenhauser, age 22, lived in Netherlands, died May 31st, 1945 in Bergen-Belsen. Wolf Edelstein, age 58, lived in Odessa, died 1942 in Uzibilnoye, Russia, USSR. Raquel Ezra, age 65, lived in Greece, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Irmgard Olsner, age 29, lived in Germany, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Makla Engelman, age 31, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz.
Naftel Engel, age 39, lived in Poland, died May 1st, 1943 in Czarniki, Lublin, Poland. Ignaz Intin, age 42, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Mendel Ehrenkrantz, age 39, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Dole, Poland. Yitzchak Erster, age 25, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Moshe Balsam, age 26, lived in Poland, died 1945 in Bergen-Belsen. George Baudenheimer, age 40, lived in France, died March 10, 1944 in Auschwitz. Elimelech Boimelgren, age 34, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Judea Bosis, age 50, lived in the USSR, died 1942 in Ulanov, Ukraine. Oster Boreshpolyaskaya, age 71, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Babi Yar. Leibel Bornstein, age 64, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Regina Buzyn, age 26, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Treblinka. Yitzhak Bunam, age 52, lived in Belgium, died January 15, 1943 in Auschwitz. Meckel Bernberg, age 26, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Belzec. Juri Berger, age 23, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Russia. Samuel Berlin, age 39, lived in Austria, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Vega Blanc, age 73, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Berdichev, Ukraine. Dina Blanc, age 36, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Berdichev, Ukraine. Riva Rosenfeld, age 60, lived in Bratslav, Ukraine, died in 1942 in a concentration camp in the Vinnytsia region. Lai Blanc, age 61, lived in the USSR, died November 5th, 1941 in Prokhorov, Ukraine. Framida Birnbaum, age 22, lived in France, died 1943 in Auschwitz.
Rosa Gorfin, age 60, lived in Lithuania, died 1941 in Lithuania. Misha Taub, age 41, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine, USSR. Shiva Abramovich, age 47, lived in the USSR, died in 1943 in Zinkov, Ukraine, USSR. Nisha Shupiltar, age 37, lived in the USSR, died in 1943 in Zinkov, Ukraine, USSR. Naftali Kugler, age 64, lived in Poland, died in 1941 in Simakowsk, Stanislaw, Poland. Siegfried Bloch, age 69, lived in Germany, died October 8, 1942, in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Matija Kotlar, age 30, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Steblev, Kiev, Ukraine. Luisa Brozlovsky, age 48, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Kiev, Ukraine, USSR. Arkady Kogan, age 37, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Dzhininsky, Sever Ossetia, Assur, Russia. Yakov Kasin, age 42, lived in the USSR, died in 1941 in Brusilov, Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Siegfried Nussbaum, age 43, lived in Germany, died February 23, 1942 in Lodz, Poland. Sarah Herring, age 52, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Tarnograd, Lublin, Poland. Josef Weisman, age 19, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Treblinka. Saul Molow, age 63, lived in Greece, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Nachman Weisman, age 25, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Midzirk, Poland. Regina Berstein, age 25, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Maria Zodek, age 58, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Oskar Zodek, age 59, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Esther Moshinsky, age 62, lived in the USSR, died in 1942 in Baku, Azerbaijan, USSR. Aaron Sider, age 56, lived in the USSR, died in 1941 in Kharkov, Ukraine, USSR. Clara Klein, age 38, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. And Chaim Ringer, age 59, lived in Belgium, died in 1942 in Auschwitz.
Odette Abulafia, age 8, lived in France, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Rose Abulafia, age 12, lived in France, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Yevdoa Bramov, age 1, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Yevpatoria, Krim. Lee Ova Abrumovich, age 4, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Khmelnyk, Vinnytosh. Pisel Abrumovich, age approximately 8, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Khmelnyk, Vinnytosh. Boris Abrumovich, age 17, lived in Lithuania, died 1944 in Kunda. Simon Abrumovich, age 10, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Emma Abrumzan, age 10, lived in USSR, died January 12, 1942 in Rossoni, Vitebsk. Ludmila Abrumzan, age 7, lived in USSR, died January 12, 1942 in Rossoni, Vitebsk. Maria Abramson, age 4, lived in USSR, died January 12, 1942 in Rossoni, Vitebsk. Ishandel Abukovsky, age 8, lived in Poland, died 1945 in Łódź. Bension Adelson, age 11, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Punari Velno. Adele Adler, age 6, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Andre Adler, age 11, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Yeno Adler, age 4, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Laszlo Adler, age 12, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Marianne Adler, age 10, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Otto Adler, age 6, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Wolf Adler, age 17, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz.
Estera Eishaboim, age 48, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Rivka Ice, age 24, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Sambor, Poland. Dawid Eiferman, age 28, lived in France, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Edward Aberson, age 57, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Poland. Felix Ephraim, age 52, lived in France, died September 1st, 1942 in Auschwitz. Flora Ehrlich, age 40, lived in Germany, died 1943 in Auschwitz. David Erleman, age 18, lived in Romania, died July 2nd, 1941 in Romania. Elsa Ehrman, age 40, lived in Germany, died 1943 in Auschwitz. George Bernitzer, age 76, lived in Germany, died October 14, 1939 in Oppland, Germany. Louis Ten Brink, age 68, lived in Germany, died 1943 in Czechoslovakia. Woli Gondelman, age 25, lived in Romania, died in 1941 in Ukraine. Margarita Goldstein, age 45, lived in Germany, died October 25th, 1942 in Bergen-Belsen. Yedel Gutmann, age 22, lived in Romania, died in 1942 in Ukraine. Rachel Gelbart, age 40, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Auschwitz. Jacob Dayan, age 30, lived in Lithuania, died June 1st, 1941, Lithuania. Ephraim Veinman, age 35, lived in the USSR, died May 1st, 1942 in Ukraine. Clara Weinstein, age 48, lived in Czechoslovakia, died January 31st, 1943 in Auschwitz. Fega Weisberg, age 18, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Ukraine. Bela Habrilovsky, age 40, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Majdanek. I. Ariasbet Teufel, age 32, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz.
Aaron Letachevsky, age 21, lived in the USSR, died 1943 in Kharkiv, Ukraine. Ruvim Letachevsky, age 25, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Kiev, Ukraine, USSR. Polya Yurovsky, age 43, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Lubnai, Poltava, Ukraine, USSR. Izak Yurovsky, age 25, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Lubnai, Poltava, Ukraine, USSR. Zygmunt Dingfelder, age 76, lived in Germany, died September 30th, 1942, in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Guta Yurovsky, age 40, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Lubnai, Poltava, Ukraine, USSR. Gensha Yurovsky, age 45, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Lubnai, Poltava, Ukraine, USSR. Berta Zik, age 54, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Boris Yurovsky, age 51, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Lubny, Poltava, Ukraine, USSR. Lena Dingfelder, age 68, lived in Germany, died September 30th, 1942 in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Josef Steinberg, age 55, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Maris Steinberg, age 35, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Hermann Dingfelder, age 73, lived in Germany, died September 2nd, 1942 in Buchenwald, Germany. Freda Schoenberg, age 50, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Tarnów, Kraków, Poland. Emilia Dingfelder, age 66, lived in Germany, died September 27th, 1942 in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. David Spalter, age 38, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Josef Spalter, age 35, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Wolf Spalter, age 29, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Isidor Reichmuntdorfer, age 76, lived in Germany, died January 23, 1943 in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Moshe de Jong, age 64, lived in Germany, died December 31st, 1943 in Riga, Latvia.
Rachel Polak, 51, Netherlands, died June 4th, 1943, Sobibor. Josef Gokis, 38, Netherlands, died September 30th, 1942, Auschwitz. Yakov Kopelevich, 34, Poland, died 1942, Dokshice. Shea Kopelevich, 36, Poland, died 1942, Dokshice. Linda Livadotsky, 68, Germany, died May 14th, 1943, Sobibor. Kaya Likola, 36, Belgium, died 1943, Auschwitz. Estelle Coit, 46, Netherlands, died February 12th, 1943, Auschwitz. Duvid Bondar, 55, USSR, died 1944, Bershed. Meyer Bondar, 37, USSR, died 1944, Burchard. Kaiser Galperin, 45, USSR, died 1943, Minsk. Naum Galperin, 46, USSR, died 1942, Minsk. Simka Tabachnik, 24, USSR, died 1941, Murmansk. Srul Fix, 58, Romania, died February 2nd, 1943, Riga. Sima Fix, 52, Romania, died December 20th, 1942, Riga. Meyer Foreman, 41, USSR, died 1943, Budanovka. Polina Frankel, 37, Romania, died 1942, Soroka. Iosif Frankel, 40, Romania, died 1942, Soroka. Dora Frankel, 63, Romania, died 1942, Soroka. Naum Kushner, 33, USSR, died 1941, Mizirov. Mordecai Kushner, 36, USSR, died 1941, Mizirov.
Natalie Israel, age 76, lived in Germany, died May 8th, 1945, in Czechoslovakia. Clara Goffman, age 39, lived in the USSR, died 1941, in Odessa, Ukraine. Hirsch Gradaswick, age 67, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Treblinka. Isaf Yavitsky, age 33, lived in the USSR, died 1943, in Orel, Russia. Efim Voldarsky, age 36, lived in USSR, died 1941, in the Ukraine. Lazar Reisman, age 35, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Voronezh, Russia. Esther Gibshman, age 33, lived in Poland, died May 11th, 1942, in Poland. David Schechter, aged 20, lived in Poland, died May 11th, 1942, in Poland. Fulia Förster, age 42, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Stanislaw, Poland. Figa Schechter, age 53, lived in Poland, died May 11th, 1942, in Stanislaw, Poland. Ita Binstock, age 37, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Chelmno. Sala Binstock, age 29, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Chelmno. Małka Binstock, age 27, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Chelmno. Israel Binstock, age 45, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Chelmno. Moj Binstock, age 23, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Chelmno. Isaf Erskis, age 72, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Charkov, Ukraine. Daniel Gibberman, age 30, lived in USSR, died October 8th, 1941, in Russia. Ida Rubin, age 19, died in USSR, 1942. Iza Urosky, age 18, lived in USSR, died in 1942, in the Ukraine. Yakov Uroskovsky, age 27, lived in USSR, died in 1941, in Kirovograd, Ukraine.
Tara Rittnitzer, age 71, lived in Hungary, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Ilanka Romer, age 38, lived in Yugoslavia, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Jonas Reinert, age 52, lived in Romania, died 1942, in Nemesh, Vinica, Ukraine. Rudolf Schanzer, age 22, lived in Poland, died in 1941, in the Soviet Union. Samuel Solomon, age 27, lived in Poland, died in 1942, in Tarnow, Krakow, Poland. Ben Solomon, age 21, lived in Romania, died 1943, in Kopazance, Tarnopol, Poland. Solomon Simonovitz, age 51, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Bergen-Belsen. Bernie Speyer, age 46, lived in Germany, died October 16th, 1944 in Auschwitz. Batsheva Zirojit, age 49, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Sobibor. Sandor Klein, age 59, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Catalin Klein, age 59, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Benjamin Cabran, age 64, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Bereza, Poland. Shaina Cabran, age 60, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Bereza, Poland. Gershon Cabran, age 31, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Bereza, Poland. Adel Cabran, age 29, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Bereza, Poland. Avraham Cabran, age 36, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Bereza, Poland. Gitel Cabran, age 33, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Bereza, Poland. Gitel Cabran, age 33, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Bereza, Poland. Esther Friedman, age 33, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Bereza, Poland. Nachman Dolgan, age 50, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Bereza, Poland. And Freda Dolgan, age 48, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Bereza, Poland.
Moishe Postolov, age 30, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Fanya Rabinovich, age 62, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Minsk, Belarus. Yankel Wasserman, age 41, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Chudnov, Ukraine. Batsheva Feldman, age 70, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Josephine Weiss, age 71, lived in Hungary, died May 7, 1944 in Auschwitz. Benjamin Friedman, age 27, lived in Poland, died September 2, 1942 in Leningrad, Russia. Alter Manovich, age 23, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Belarus. Benzion Sandler, age 34, lived in Poland, died July 21, 1942 in Leningrad, Russia. Benzion Spielberg, age 28, lived in USSR, died March 24, 1942 in Warsaw, Poland. Eva Skelki, age 30, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Abram Gnayazu, age 61, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Avram Rosman, age 21, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Moshe Spatzman, age 18, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Meyer Brexler, age 35, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Robert Rado, age 69, lived in Yugoslavia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Soya Kantor, age 22, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Sumy, Ukraine. Benzion Belinsky, age 50, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Umani, Kiev, Ukraine. Benzion Dakhtar, age 57, lived in USSR, died December 26, 1942 in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Margit Traurig, age 33, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Margaret Squark, age 34, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz.
Maurizio Sporn, age 54, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Sari Adler, age 52, lived in Hungary, died June 10th, 1944 in Auschwitz. Ella Weiss, age 52, lived in Hungary, died June 10th, 1944, in Auschwitz. Mancy Hertz, age 49, lived in Hungary, died June 10th, 1944, in Auschwitz. Marta Herzog, age 33, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Leo Wellish, age 56, lived in Hungary, died December 4th, 1944, in Buchenwald, Germany. Hermina Fried, age 41, lived in Hungary, died July 6, 1944, in Auschwitz. Hermine Stern, age 46, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Erzsébet Stern, age 22, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Johanna Strauss, age 71, lived in Germany, died 1942 in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Oscar Strauss, age 47, lived in Germany, died 1942 in Izbica, Poland. Beecha Italiander, age 48, lived in the Netherlands, died September 30th, 1942, in Auschwitz. Israel Hamel, age 52, lived in the Netherlands, died September 30th, 1942, in Auschwitz. Maria Adler, age 20, lived in Hungary, died 1945 in Ravensbrück, Germany. Katalin Schwartz, age 41, lived in Hungary, died May 26, 1944, in Auschwitz. Morik Schwartz, age 49, lived in Hungary, died May 26, 1944, in Auschwitz. Ita Yufa, age 63, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Zhytomyr, Ukraine, in the USSR. Esther Beigel, age 45, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Zhytomyr, Ukraine, in the USSR. Guta Gorodetsky, age 60, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Fania Rosenberg, age 45, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Dagda, Latvia.
Leva Planskin, age 23, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Leningrad, Russia. Mara Sunkin, age 27, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine. Vera Golden, age 35, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine. Sophia Golden, age 53, lived in USSR, died in 1941, Mariupol, Ukraine. Yefim Golden, age 55, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine. Anna Shukbach, age 26, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Liaba Magid, 37, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Karelia. Yanko Levinstein, age 52, lived in Poland, died 1945 in Germany. Peskat Kortman, age 48, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Smolensk, Russia. Lieb Fickman, age 28, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Brășad, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Yanko Fidman, age 61, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Bershad, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Esther Friedman, age 54, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Bershad, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Fradia Lerner, age 40, lived in USSR, died December 28, 1941, in Drobinsky Yar, Krokov, Ukraine. Moshe Kaplan, age 54, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Storodub, Oral, Russia. Olga Rosenberg, age 50, lived in USSR, died 1941, in Odessa, Ukraine. Aron Rosenberg, age 54, lived in USSR, died 1941, in Odessa, Ukraine. Pinchas Rosenberg, age 50, lived in USSR, died 1941, in Odessa, Ukraine. Lvola Rosenberg, age 52, lived in USSR, died 1941, in Odessa, Ukraine. Clara Grinberg, age 47, lived in USSR, died 1941, in Odessa, Ukraine. Shulam Lipbach, age 27, lived in Romania, died 1941, in Nudini, Bessarabia, Romania.
Yakov Krugli, Brandel Steingard, Yosef Bider, Anna Bider, Yud Sukman, Cayenne Sukman, Sor Feldman, Jindal Feldman, Schleim Feldman, Lizer Feldman, Nokim Feldman, Dine Frid, Rokel Frid, Avron Frid, Lev Pavlovsky, Merlia Parapelitsky, Azik Mass, Lipo Taub, Nachman Fain.
Riva Bagel, Moisha Bagel, Mariam Bagel, Ansa Tuckerman, Nachman Cooperschmidt, Gilia Rabanovich, Eli Schenkter, David Chikanovich, Clara Feinstein, Rana Kugliak, Brona Lerman, Mikkel Lerman, Itzik Gottlieb, Yankel Lerman, Roka Lerman, Hendel Gottlieb, Moisha Gottlieb, Marquette Alexander, Sosiah Kiemer, Abram Itnen.
Golda Wolfson, age 21, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Vincian Gurvich, age 49, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Samuel Gurvich, age 47, lived in Poland, died in 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Isaac Eidelman, age 42, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Ropol, Orjonokitsa, Stavrakrai in Russia. Yuli Baich, age 27, lived in the USSR, died 1942 in Ukraine. Ber Hershkovitz, age 31, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Helena Kacher, age 18, lived in Czechoslovakia, died January 23, 1943 in Auschwitz. Naum Roisman, age 45, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Simferopol, Crimea in Russia. Otto Sternlich, age 40, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1942 in Treblinka. Erwin Sternlicht, age 45, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1942 in Treblinka. Alfred Sternlich, age 49, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1943 in Lvov, Poland. Arnos Bordavka, age 29, lived in Czechoslovakia, died June 5th, 1942, in Brno, Czechoslovakia. Arnold Neumann, age 56, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Aaron Zinman, age 47, lived in the USSR, died January 14, 1942, in Ushashki, Vitebsk, Belarus. Mulia Rabinovich, age 28, lived in the USSR, died January 14, 1942, in Kublichi, Vitebsk, Belarus. Chaim Rabinovich, age 64, lived in the USSR, died January 14, 1942, in Kublichi, Vitebsk, in Belarus. Boris Feigelman, age 32, lived in the USSR, died January 14, 1942, in Ushachki, Vitebsk, Belarusia. Rosa Feigelman, age 27, lived in the USSR, died January 14, 1942, in Uchachki, Vitebsk, in Belarus. Sonia Scher, age 38, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Zilia Weinberg, age 37, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Pinsk, Polesia, Poland.
Fazia Braunfeld, age 4, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Kharkov, Ukraine. Tatiana Braunfeld, age 1, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Kharkov, Ukraine. Frida Bronner, age 14, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Nukem Bronstein, age 16, lived in Romania, died 1942 in Transnistria. Boria Brover, age 17, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Muzia Brover, age 15, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Aniko Brust, age 16, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Budapest, Hungary. Perla Brusishka, age 5, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Ozorko, Lodz, Poland. Velvla Briel, age 8, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Poland. Edith Buchsbaum, age 8, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Vilmos Buchsbaum, age 14, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1941 in Auschwitz. Daniel Buchwald, age 8, lived in France, died October 9th, 1942 in Auschwitz. Shimon Budman, age 10, lived in the USSR, died December 2nd, 1941 in Pavlovsk, Zhytomyr, Ukraine, USSR. Leonid Bookbinder, age 16, lived in USSR, died October 14th, 1941 in Lubny, Poltava, Ukraine, USSR. Bronislav Borakovsky, age 3, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Odessa, Ukraine, USSR. Maria Bordo, age 12, lived in USSR, died April 10th, 1942, in Leningrad, Russia, USSR. Noya Borstein, age 14, lived in USSR, died October 4th, 1941, in Lenindorf, Ukraine, USSR. Yosef Kaikin, age 16, lived in Lithuania, died 1941, in Ponives, Lithuania. Isaac Kaimovich, age 11, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Kana Kaimovich, age 9, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944, in Auschwitz.
Yudel Dolgan, Vega Dolgan, Lucky Tyker, Nachum Rabinovitz, Alessandro Farber, Abram Micklin, Chaim Dichter, Esther Dichter, Yasov Dichter, Kaya Berger, Sarah Smarkovitz, Toba Pasavko, Manuka Shmarkovitz, Sonia Shmarkovitz, Yanko Shmarkovitz, Leba Shmarkovitz, Irena Boritz, Andrei Leb, Helena Gal, Helena Lestigova.
Beanin Brown, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Edith Brown, age 14, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Jakob Brown, age 7, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Pabianice, Poland. Monique Brown, age 11, lived in France, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Rebecca Brown, age 4, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Dubno-Wojen, Poland. Boriska Breiner, age 8, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Arzia Breiner, age 17, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Istvan Breiner, age 10, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Marty Breiner, age 6, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Irka Breiderman, age 17, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Haya Breiner, age 15, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Beschetz. Arisa Brechner, age 3, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia. Sarah Brecker, age 5, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia. Rish Brill, age 17, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Warsaw, Poland. Meyer Brill, age 6, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Bergen, Germany. Musha Brilon, age 17, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Sipvenka, Mogilev, Belarusia. Itaha Bromberg, age 11, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Odessa, Ukraine. Chaim Bromberg, age 7, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Odessa, Ukraine. Akiva Brochner, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Kisel Bronner, age 10, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz.
Esther Riva Demb, age unknown, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Yitzhak Demb, age unknown, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Tema Garberman, age unknown, born in Poland, died 1941 in Belarusia. Avade Garberman, age unknown, born in Poland, died 1941 in Belarusia. Baruch Garberman, age unknown, born in Poland, died 1941 in Belarusia. Gersh Garberman, age unknown, born in Poland, died 1941 in Belarusia. Malka Garberman, age unknown, born in Poland, died 1941 in Belarusia. Luba Garberman, age unknown, born in Poland, died 1941 in Belarusia. Raquel Koshevich, age 23, born in Bratislav, Ukraine, died 1943 in a concentration camp in the Vinnytsia region. Simon Igolnikov, age 16, born in Kiev, Ukraine, died 1941 in Babi Yar, Ukraine. Galina Igolnikova, age 4, born in Kiev, Ukraine, died 1941 in Babi Yar, Ukraine. Sonia Khan, age 16, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Avram Khan, age 13, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Basia Khan, age 12, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Kava Khan, age 10, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Efim Koifman, age 46, born in Kiskaya Oblast, Ukraine, died 1941 in Babi Yar, Ukraine. Sosia Lakak, age 4, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Sosia Lakak, age 5, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Nachman David Lekach, age 2, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Kalman Yitzhak Lekach, age unknown, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Bashiva Lekach, age unknown, born in Holoby, Poland, died 1942 in Holoby, Poland.
Vega Epstein, age 2, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Łódź, Poland. Ernestia Ehrlich, age 16, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Stanislavov, Poland. Pinches Ehrlichman, age 2, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Kamytsk-Podolsky City, Kamytsk-Podolsky. Sarah Ehrlichman, age 9, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Leah Earlman, age 16, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Transnistria. Rivka Earlman, age 14, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Transnistria. Polina Ehrlich, age 15, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine.
Raquel Estrin, age 16, lived in Poland, died August 20th, 1943, in Głuboki Wilno, Poland. Isaac Ezrati, age 1, lived in Greece, died April 26, 1943, in Auschwitz. Abba Fabrikovic, age 14, lived in Lithuania, died August 1st, 1941, in Pandalys, Lithuania. Schnindel Foss, age 4, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Lemberg camp. Josef Forkach, age 4, lived in Romania, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Abram Fudiman, age 2, lived in USSR, died May 1st, 1942, in Vinkovsky, Kamets-Podolsky, Ukraine. Shura Fudiman, age 3, lived in USSR, died May 1st, 1942, in Vinkovsky, Ukraine. Mentia Foreman, age 14, lived in Romania, died 1941, in Balanovka. Tomas Gabor, age 2, lived in Romania, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Susan Gall, age 5, lived in Hungary, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Ira Gaminardnik, age 4, lived in USSR, died 1941, in Drubitsky Yar, Kharkov, Ukraine. Clara Gampel, age 2, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Minsk, Belarus. Rejla Gandler, age 16, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Tuczyn-Wolin, Poland.
Raquel Braun, age 32, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Samuel Brand, age 18, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Belzig. Katja Breitbart, lived age 50, lived in the Netherlands, died 1943 in Sobibor. Eli Gonk, age 45, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Aaron Gorodensky, age 50, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Minsk, Belarus. Bat Svea Gelis, age 22, lived in Romania, died in Transnistria. Abraham Grontman, age 20, lived in the Netherlands, died June 4th, 1943 in Sobibor. Kalman Grunberg, age 54, lived in Romania, died June 1st, 1944 in Kolozsvár, Romania. Usher Grunberg, age 64, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Baisa Desh, age 50, lived in the USSR, died July 1st, 1942 in Olenov, Vincenisa in the Ukraine. Elizabeth Haas Day, age 25, lived in the Netherlands, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Aaron Van Dias, age 60, lived in the Netherlands, died May 17, 1945 in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Benitian Weinkrantz, age 30, lived in Poland, died January 18, 1943 in Treblinka. Mario Veroli D., age 33, lived in Italy, died June 25, 1944 in Warzawa, Poland. Itka Verkhovsky, age 64, lived in the USSR, died October 21, 1941 in Rudnya, Smolensk, Russia. Mania Kavin, age 31, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Osipovichi, Belarus. Nisim Israel, age 70, lived in Italy, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Ben Zion Kahan, age 22, lived in Poland, died in 1941 in Kauno, Lithuania. Mazel Tov Cohen, age 45, lived in France, died June 1st, 1943 in Auschwitz. Madi Lichtman, age 68, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Sobibor.
Velwul Kazan, age 53, lived in the USSR, died 1942 in Yubimavka, Ukraine. Clara Adler, age 47, lived in Germany, died 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Raquel Kazan, age 40, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Yubimavka, Ukraine. Mina Friedberger, age 47, lived in Germany, died 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Hermann Einstein, age 62, lived in Germany, died 1940 in Stuttgart, Germany. Laura Arnold, age 53, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Lvov, Poland. Stephanie Arnold, age 32, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Belzec. Frederique Arnold, age 42, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Lvov, Poland. Cecile Arnold, age 53, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Lvov, Poland. Elise Botten, age 70, lived in France, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Raphael Botten, age 67, lived in France, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Sammy Botten, age 41, lived in France, died 1945 in Berstadt, Germany. Laser Rubenstein, age 42, lived in USSR, died August 1st, 1944 in Jekabpils, Latvia. Hoynal Grossman, age 32, lived in Hungary, died May 22nd, 1944 in Auschwitz. Yakov Lukatsky, age 25, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Voronezh, Russia. Olga Grossman, age 34, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Kanan Katz, age 36, lived in USSR, died July 1st, 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. David Mazer, age 30, lived in Romania, died July 21st, 1941 in Soroca, Romania. Huna Mazer, age 36, lived in Romania, died July 21st, 1941 in Soroca, Romania. Nachman Fidel, age 43, lived in Romania, died July 21st, 1941 in Soroca, Romania.
Grigory Fredental, age 43, lived in USSR, died September 23rd, 1943 in Minsk, Belarusia. Basha Feldman, age 41, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Minsk, Belarusia. Pesha Fried, age 66, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia. Chaim Like Time Lokshin, age 66, lived in USSR, died August 5th, 1942 in Leningrad, Russia. Yusif Kokin, age 27, lived in USSR and died December 9th, 1943 in Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Vera Spivak, age 70, lived in USSR, died October 14th, 1942 in Leningrad, Russia. Yusif Solovyev, age 41, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Moskva, Russia. Boris Fuchs, age 32, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Smolensk, Russia. Leonid Fuchs, age 36, lived in USSR, died July 8, 1943 in Orel, Russia. Kava Smolyar, age 43, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Yakov Stern, age 63, lived in USSR, died August 14, 1942 in Lobkovsky, Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine. Rachel Stern, age 26, lived in USSR, died August 14, 1942 in Lobkovsky, Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine. Anna Stern, age 18, lived in USSR, died August 14, 1942 in Lobkovsky, Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine. Yakov Pombrick, age 35, lived in USSR, died in 1943 in Smolensk, Russia. Miriam Milkstein, age 56, lived in USSR, died August 14, 1942 in Lobovsky, Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine. Simeon Pembroke, age 32, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Elka Friedman, age 27, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Yakutskov, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Itzik Glutz, age 46, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Yaltuskov, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Yusif Gluz, age 19, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Yaltushkov, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Mordko Segal, age 48, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Erezga, Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine.
Benzion Fabricant, age 36, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Vetka, Gomel, Belarusia, USSR. Batshiva Forvasser, age 39, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Luminiec, Polesi, Poland. Yehoshusa Fisher, age 65, lived in Hungary, died May 23, 1944 in Auschwitz. Helena Veit, age 75, lived in Germany, died September 4, 1942 in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Benzion Fetterman, age 19, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Batshiva Frucht, age 23, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Kiva Kapustin, age 61, lived in USSR, died 1941, Rechista, Gomel, Belarusia, USSR. Mikska Kiss, age 57, lived in Yugoslavia, died 1944 in Budapest, Hungary. Libby Kleinman, age 25, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Belzec. Flora Nobleman, age 53, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine, USSR. Elka Krupeni, age 48, lived in Poland, died January 20, 1943, unknown place. Jakub Krystal, age 18, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Chełmno. Burl Radomski, age 35, lived in Lithuania, died 1943 in Kaunas, Lithuania. Alexander Rowitz, age 28, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Warsaw, Poland. Jatela Rockin, age 45, lived in Poland, died November 7, 1941 in Rone, Poland. Moshe Rosenblum, age 40, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Majdanek. Josef Rojner, age 42, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Ukraine, USSR. Rana Rucher, age 42, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Kamnitz, Podolsk, Ukraine, USSR. Earl Rittman, age 36, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Doshince, Wilno, Poland.
Joseph Lilienbaum, age 34, lived in France, died March 6, 1943 in Majdanek. Miriam Lieber, age 52, lived in Poland, died October 14, 1942 in Treblinka. Georges Levi, age 43, lived in France, died February 18, 1945 in Elrich, Saxony, Germany. Lubov Levin, age 56, lived in the USSR, died July 1st, 1941 in Palkino, Russia. David Lukowitz, age 22, lived in Poland, died in 1941 in Leszno, Poland. Max Cohn, age 76, lived in Germany, died in 1941 in Revalsaltis, France. Dejo Lorenz, age 43, lived in Romania, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Benzion Major, age 38, lived in the USSR and died September 22, 1943 in Stalingrad, Russia. Dvorya Koronvian, age 63, lived in Bratislav, Ukraine, died in 1943 in a concentration camp in Vinnytsia region. Benzion Malamud, age 44, lived in the USSR, died in 1941 in Chernetsky, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Yolan Markutz, age 41, lived in Hungary and died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Chaya Musman, age 52, lived in Poland and died in 1942 in Ostrog-Wolin, Poland. Avaram Neubauer, age 45, lived in Czechoslovakia and died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Sarah, no last name, age 25, lived in Poland and died on June 23, 1943 in Dubienka, Lublin, Poland. Barend Sojan, age 59, who lived in the Netherlands, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Razel Sistakovitsky, age 54, lived in Poland and died on November 25, 1941 in Brest, Polezi, Poland. Benzion Papo, age 39, lived in Yugoslavia and died in 1941 in Jasenovac, Hrvatska, Yugoslavia. Bat Sheba Polak, age 46, lived in Romania and died on May 25, 1944 in Auschwitz. Alter Portnoy, age 42, lived in the USSR and died on May 29, 1942 in Yanushpol, Ukraine. Yakov Portnoy, age 38, lived in the USSR and died in 1944 in the USSR.
Pepe Lieb, age 35, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Boryslaw, Poland. Chaim Kleiman, age 39, lived in USSR, died October 22, 1943 in Gomel, Belarus. Shlomo Pressman, age 21, lived in the USSR, died 1943 in Otashkov, Kalinin, Russia. Elia Gershman, age 23, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Brest, Poland. Alexander Kogan, age 39, lived in the USSR, died June 9, 1943 in Krasnodar Krai, Russia. Meyer Kalman, age 50, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Estera Kalman, age 49, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Eugene Fish, age 65, lived in Hungary, died June 6, 1944 in Auschwitz. Stefan Fuchs, age 40, lived in Hungary, died 1942 in Voronezh, Russia. Agnes Fuchs, age 31, lived in Czechoslovakia, died June 6, 1944 in Auschwitz. Bella Fuchs, age 39, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Brno, Germany. Nika Kaczerginski, age 26, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Ponery, Vilna, Poland. Dvora Vikormiski, age 42, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Ponery, Vilna, Poland. Rivka Kopelman, age 42, lived in Poland, died August 7, 1942 in Brest, Litowsk, Polesi, Poland. Lev Bant, age 49, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Rakhil Raznik, age 39, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Rudnya, Smolensk, Russia. Kahim Bazin, age 43, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Rudnya, Smolensk, Russia. Kana Lazarev, age 61, lived in the USSR, died 1942 in Voronezh, Russia. Devozia Livshitz, age 31, lived in the USSR, died 1943 in Gomel, Belarusia. Iontel Shinderman, age 50, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine.
Leah Horn, age 15, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Tulumak, Stanisław, Poland. Sipora Horn, age 13, lived in Poland, died January 1st, 1939 in Sulejów, Poland. Yaanov Hornfeld, age 16, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Yehuda Hornfeld, age 5, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Josef Hornfeld, age 7, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Henry Horowitz, age 13, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Poland. Eva Horowitz, age 9, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Iboya Horowitz, age 10, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Joseph Horowitz, age 8, lived in Romania, died June 6, 1944 in Auschwitz. Laszlo Horowitz, age 12, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Milka Horowitz, age 8, lived in Poland, died June 22, 1942 in Auschwitz. T.B. Horowitz, age 7, lived in Romania, died June 6, 1944 in Auschwitz. Hanie Horowitz, age 15, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Hinda Horowitz, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Reza Horowitz, age 15, lived in Poland, died June 22, 1942 in Auschwitz. Shlomo Horowitz, age 4, lived in Poland, died June 22, 1942 in Auschwitz. Hinko Horthy, age 14, lived in Yugoslavia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Meir Huf, age 8, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Frapul, Lublin, Poland. Nathan Hoff, age 10, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Frapul, Lublin, Poland. Shimon Hoff, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Frapul, Lublin, Poland.
Israel Dorfman, age 11, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Berdichev, Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Liebel Dorfman, age 15, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Berdichev, Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Lyuba Dubowski, age 12, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Pogrevicha, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Rakil Dolets, age 5, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Minsk, Belarusia. Roma Dolets, age 11, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Minsk, Belarusia. Baruch Dvorkin, age 8, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Kaun, Lithuania. Frida Dvorkin, age 11, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Kaun, Lithuania. Grigory Dvorkin, age 17, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Nakama Dvorkin, age 15, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Port Honda, Estonia. Meyer Chawachinski, age 16, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Gidel Abacek, age 8, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Szydłce, Poland. Asna Edel, age 6, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Koja, Białystok, Poland. Aya Edelman, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Vilkomir, Lithuania. Nahum Edelman, age 13, lived in Latvia, died 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Aharon Edelstein, age 5, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Komarov, Lublin, Poland. Model Efron, age 17, lived in USSR, died October 14, 1941 in Smilovicha, Minsk, Belarusia. Marceli Egert, age 15, lived in Poland, died June 23, 1943 in Lwów, Poland. Sarah Ehrenwald, age 8, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Shinawa, Lwów, Poland. Emil Ehrlich, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Stanisławów, Poland. Dora Eidelman, age 17, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine.
Michael Abrams, age 20, lived in Germany, died in 1943 in Bergen-Belsen, Germany. Rudolf Anschel, age 48, lived in Germany, died February 12, 1942 in Buchenwald, Germany. Helene Bachmann, age 77, lived in Germany, died in 1942, and Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Anne Buck, age 57, lived in Germany, died in 1942 in Auschwitz. Edith Chabolsky, age 13, lived in Germany, died October 27, 1941 in Lodz, Poland. Edith Goldman, age 39, lived in Germany, died February 19, 1943 in Auschwitz. Flora Goldschmidt, age 57, lived in Germany, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Edith Goldstein, age 30, lived in Germany, died in 1943 in Auschwitz. Helen Halpert, age 44, lived in Germany, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Rosa Herkovich, age 26, lived in Germany, died in 1943 in Auschwitz. Flora Hirschberger, age 26, lived in Germany, died in 1942 in Piaski, Poland. Zoralina Jaeger, age 79, lived in Germany, died February 13, 1943 in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Frida Jaskowitz, age 57, lived in Germany, died in 1942 in Auschwitz. Jacobin Katz, age 53, lived in Germany, died in 1943, Auschwitz. Anna Kohn, age 51, lived in Germany, died 1941 in Auschwitz. Heinz Kohn, age 17, lived in Germany, died October 24th, 1941 in Lodz, Poland. Yitzhak Krautworth, age 46, lived in Germany, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Rosie Levy, age 24, lived in Germany, died in 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Mina Levi, age 78, lived in Germany, died April 17, 1943 in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. Lothar Laser, age 23, lived in Germany, died September 7th, 1943 in Poland.
Yankel Krymer, age 60, lived in USSR, died 1941, Gayson, Ukraine. Yisrael Rabinovich, age 61, lived in USSR, died October 6, 1941, in Gorky, Belarusia. Pavel Rabinovich, age 19, lived in USSR, died October 6, 1941, in Gorky, Belarusia. Avram Rabinovich, age 19, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Stalingrad, Russia. Avram Borisov, age 58, lived in USSR, died September 30th, 1941, in Babi Yar. Leah Appel, age 24, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Tagunrak, Russia. Reuven Fuchsin, age 22, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Leningrad, Russia. Bendel Burovsky, age 18, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Kharkov, Ukraine. Alexander Borowski, age 32, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Emmanuel Belostovsky, age 33, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Arul, Russia. Avram Kruvsnov, age 27, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Stalingrad, Russia. Hirsch Gusak, age 71, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Zhitotovka, Ukraine. Berta Ustovoy, age 61, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Zhitotovka, Ukraine. Mon Gusak, age 36, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Zhivotovka, Ukraine. Imo Gusak, age 34, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Zhivotovka, Ukraine. Yankel Schwittmann, age 56, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Pohrebichev, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Ruvin Kretmo, age 51, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Zlobin, Belarus. Ida Kretmo, age 20, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Shlobin, Homel, Belarusia. Pesha Kretmo, age 58, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Batsevitchi, Belarusia. Kasha Robinchik, age 47, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Spilak, Belarusia.
Rogi Moses, age 18, lived in Romania, died May 1st, 1944, in Auschwitz. Shani Meha, age 42, lived in Romania, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Shani Dab, age 33, lived in Romania, died June 1st, 1944, in Auschwitz. Boji Solomon, age 31, lived in Romania, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Jano Fekete, age 47, lived in Hungary, died in 1944, in Auschwitz. Dina Demetz, age 45, lived in the Netherlands, died July 10, 1943, Sobibor. Irma Lustig, age 30, lived in Hungary, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Hans Meyer, age 28, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Riga, Latvia. Yakov Pomerantsev, age 24, lived in the USSR, died January 23, 1943, in the USSR. Toba Fleisch, age 67, lived in the USSR, died in 1941 in Tokavrevka, Ukraine. Isaac Fleisch, age 68, lived in the USSR, died in 1941 in Tokavrevka, Ukraine, USSR. Pesek Kipnis, age 21, lived in the USSR, died in 1942 in the USSR. Abraham Berden, age 50, lived in the Netherlands, died January 28, 1944, in Auschwitz. Yasha Shapiro, age 27, lived in the USSR, died in 1941, in Babrushk, Mokenapov, Belarus. Russia, USSR. Natel Ulrich, age 18, lived in Poland, died in 1942. In Ovnov, Lvov, Poland. Kaika Surkis, age 36, lived in the USSR, died in 1942. In Pechora, Vinnytsia, Ukraine, USSR. Moishe Surkis, age 38, lived in the USSR, died in 1941. And Dnipropetrovsk, Ukraine, USSR. Kavna Surkis, age 23, lived in the USSR, died in 1941 in Ukraine, USSR. Kavet Surkis, age 65, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Pechora, Vinnytsia, Ukraine, USSR. Moishe Nigops, age 63, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine, USSR.
Lyubov Lov, age 78, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Babi Yar. Mitek Alibek, age 34, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Sala Elembek, age 20, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Severin Alibek, age 33, lived in Poland, died in 1943 in Auschwitz. Simeon Boretsky, age 65, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Jabrowski Yar, Ukraine, USSR. Belia Voretsky, age 45, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Jabretsky Yar, Ukraine, USSR. Kaya Romanovich, age 61, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Jabretsky Yar, Ukraine, USSR. Hugo Mayer, age 78, lived in Germany, died 1942 in Noe, France. Boris Kotorzy, age 39, lived in USSR, died August 9, 1943 in Kharkov, Ukraine, USSR. Jadeldi Ackerman, age 31, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Belzec. Avram Kavuski, age 49, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Kremenberg, Poltava, Ukraine, USSR. Jacob Newberg, age 29, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Lvov, Poland. Shaya Javisky, age 41, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Amivar, Russia, USSR. Ichik Najman, age 56, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Perla Najman, age 55, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Masha, age 28, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Radomyshal, Itamar, Ukraine, USSR. Arno Grossman, age 34, lived in Hungary, died January 13, 1943 in Stalino, Ukraine, USSR. Kahim Grinvald, age 51, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Rebecca, Romania. Tony Krilinvad, age 50, lived in Romania, died in Rebecca, Besibaria, Romania.
Benzion Abramovich, age 46, lived in Poland, died in Auschwitz in 1943. Sarah Abramson, age 23, lived in Poland, died in Latvia in 1941. Nina Adler, age 42, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in Auschwitz in 1942. Fega Adam, age 25, lived in Poland, died in Poland in 1942. Rika Auerbach, age 65, lived in Poland, died in Poland in 1942. Shabtai Augustowski, age 39, lived in Poland, died in Poland in 1941. Chaim Avroblaski, age 47, lived in Poland, died in Treblinka in 1942. Bernard Altman, age 47, lived in Romania, died in Ukraine on February 22, 1942. Isaac Angel, age 64, lived in Greece, died in Poland in 1940. Menachem Amsterdamski, age 19, lived in Lithuania, died in Germany on April 23, 1945.
Mikhail Golik, age 29, lived in USSR, died in 1941, Mariupol, Ukraine. Robert Tusik, age 22, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1942 in Auschwitz. Mikhail Gendler, age 21, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine. Yakov Gendler, age 46, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine. Raquel Gendler, age 49, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine. Maurice Rosenfeld, age 56, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Basha Pevzner, age 25, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Uzbekistan. Esther Rosenfeld, age 55, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Rosa Belfer, age 31, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Satanov, Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine. Figa Zlotnik, age 76, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Bratislav, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Sophia Malkus, age 46, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Nikolaev, Ukraine. Clara Roish, age 41, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Krasnodar, Russia. Sofa Tenenbaum, age 18, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Odessa, Ukraine. Esther Schifrin, age 35, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Minsk, Belarusia. Samuel Malkin, age 48, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Minsk, Belarusia. Samuel Poltorik, age 33, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Kyiv, Ukraine. Martha Schwab, age 54, lived in Germany, died in 1942 in Poland. Isaac Malamud, age 40, lived in USSR, died in 1943 in Rostov-na-Donu, Russia. Mendel Schnall, age 65, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Velinsk, Slomensk, Russia. Ida Schnall, age 63, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Velinsk, Smolensk, Russia.
Lena Baranovsky, age 32, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Vilish, Russia. Lisa Mizell, age 31, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Minsk, Belarus. Ita Adam, age 62, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Belzec. Isaac Tamer, age 24, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Ukraine. Beryl Teamer, age 61, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Ukraine. Malika Medved, age 42, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Ukraine. Rivka Vosner, age 55, lived in Poland, died in 1943 in Grodek, Poland. Sarah Vosner, age 35, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Grodek, Poland. Mojż Vosner, age 36, lived in Poland, died in 1941 in Rudki, Poland. Israel Tuvel, age 48, lived in Poland, died in 1944 in Poland. Jeanindel Lin, age 51, lived in Poland, died in 1943 in Poland. Yusif Flynn, age 51, lived in Poland, died in 1943 in Poland. Nachman Lin, age 47, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Muskra, Russia. Yankel Kleiner, age 55, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Ukraine. Sura Martyr, age 70, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Ukraine. Isaac Berstein, age 19, lived in the USSR, died in 1944 in Lwów, Poland. Isaac Fleischman, age 38, lived in the USSR, died in 1942 in Ukraine. Ruvim Lifshitz, age 24, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Muskra, Russia. Don Adam, age 70, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Poland. Tankum Axelrod, age 35, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Russia.
Genia Resnick, age 21, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Belarusia, USSR. Raquel Finkler, age 44, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Drobitsky Yar, Karnov, Ukraine, USSR. Yevsey Finkler, age 46, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Drobitsky Yar, Kharkov, Ukraine, USSR. Solomon Okun, age 40, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Leningrad, Russia, USSR. Moshe Bleicher, age 49, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Tarog, Rostov-na-Donu, Russia, USSR. Leah Blecker, age 46, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Tagarog, Rostov-na-Donu, Russia, USSR. Israel Chach, age 35, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Stalingrad, Russia, USSR. Morduk Fishman, age 28, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Ukraine, USSR. Yakov Fishman, age 21, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Moscow, Russia, USSR. Idel Abranovich, age 45, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Zielonka, Wilno, Poland. Sir Grinberg, age 49, lived in Cherkasy, died 1941 in Cherkasy, Kiev, Ukraine, USSR. Georgi Kaufman, age 23, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Mikhail Fish, age 42, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Moscow, Russia, USSR. Chaim Felgender, age 44, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Sarny, Wolin, Poland. Benzion Divinsky, age 25, lived in USSR, died December 20th, 1943 in Kalinin, Russia, USSR. Solomon Chanobroda, age 29, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Buchenwald, Germany. Yosef Feigen, age 69, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Korma, Belarusa, USSR. Alexander Portney, age 30, lived in USSR, died 1945 in Poland. Lev Gurevich, age 34, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Kalinin, Russia, USSR. Boris Sindalovsky, age 21, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Leningrad, Russia, USSR.
Rosa Galkin, age 32, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Kana Tabakman, age 71, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Andres Froelich, age 20, lived in Germany, died in 1941 in Mauthausen, Austria. Judith Schwitz, age 76, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Police, Belarus. Ovsy Schwitz, age 75, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Police, Belarus. Ilya Shekman, age 50, lived in USSR, died in 1943 in Odessa, Ukraine. Fana Shekman, age 49, lived in USSR, died in 1943 in Odessa, Ukraine. Esther Fogelson, age 53, lived in Poland, died September 23, 1943 in Treblinka. Kona Koton, age 56, lived in Poland, died in 1941 in Wilno, Poland. Raya Shabatsberg, age 23, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Minsk, Belarus. Boris Levine, age 31, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Minsk, Belarus. Hunyi Ponsnikov, age 41, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Kiev, Ukraine. Ihosif Weinstein, age 32, lived in USSR, died in 1943 in Leningrad, Russia. Fritz Hirschman, age 65, lived in Czechoslovakia, died October 9, 1944 in Auschwitz. Yigi Bonde, age 32, lived in Czechoslovakia, died June 21, 1942 in Czechoslovakia. Gusto Pansiki, age 34, lived in Romania, died October 17, 1943 in Russia. Noika Kelmamacher, age 51, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Russia. Isaac Goldfeld, age 29, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Ukraine. Mikhail Goldfeld, age 37, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Stalingrad, Russia. David Cherkasky, age 35, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Kiev, Ukraine.
Heike Lecter, age 52, lived in USSR, died in 1941, Vinnytsia, Ukraine, USSR. Josef Stein, age 52, lived in Germany, died 1942 in Riga, Latvia. Yalitskeva Meyerson, age 37, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Propetrovsk, Dnepropetrovsk, Ukraine. Malka Stein, age 47, lived in Germany, died 1942 in Riga, Latvia. Aaron Sokolinsky, age 39, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Sevastopol, Crimea, Russia, USSR. Regina Scharf, age 38, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Brody, Tarnopol, Poland. Michal Velig, age 67, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Krasnodar Krai, Russia, USSR. Hela Brand, age 18, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Korzina, Lwów, Poland. Rihela Brand, age 19, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Korzina, Wow, Poland. Fievel Fuchson, age 26, lived in USSR, died January 10, 1942 in Leningrad, Russia, USSR. Yakov Rubenstein, age 43, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Stolps, Nowogródek, Poland. Sheva Stern, age 59, lived in USSR, died August 14, 1942 in Lavkovsky, Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine. Yitskava Schmidt, age 60, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Fania Yofe, age 32, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Tolokin, Vitebsk, Belarusia, USSR. Leon Segal, age 48, lived in USSR, died February 7, 1942 in Leningrad, Russia, 1942, USSR. Shaya Odesky, age 53, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine, USSR. Fega Odesky, age 48, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine, USSR. Samuel Goldfeld, age 62, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Brabrinsk, Kirovograd, Ukraine, USSR.
Slava Abramova, age 60, born in Lithuania, died 1941 in Ukraine. Ilya Mordulovich Eichenbaum, age 39, born in Dnipropetrovsk, Ukraine, died in the same place in 1941. Ekaterina Eichenbaum, age 38, born in Ukraine, died 1941 in Ukraine. Mikhail Naumovich Eichenbaum, age 22, born in Ukraine, died in 1944 in an unknown location. Grigory Ilyevich Eichenbaum, the whole family, age 15, born in Ukraine, died 1941 in Ukraine. Naum Mordovich Eichenbaum, age 21, born in Sedlec, Poland, died in an unknown location. Aya Elievna Eichenbaum, age 12, born in Ukraine, died 1941 in Ukraine. Yulia Ilyinichna Eichenbaum, age 12, born in Ukraine, died also 1941 in Ukraine. Gersh Ilyich Eichenbaum, also age 12, also born in Ukraine and also died, murdered in Ukraine, 1941. Aaron Modulovich Eichenbaum, age unknown, born in Sedlec, Poland, died in 1943, Ukraine. Sifua Aptekar, age 36, born in Kiev, Ukraine, died 1941, Babi Yar, Ukraine. Zalman Bogacek, age unknown, born in Ukraine, died in 1943 in Russia. Nachman Dem, age 20, born in Holoby, Poland, died in the same place, 1942. Chaya Dem, age 18, born in Holoby, Poland, and again murdered in the same place, 1942. Liebisch Dem, age 16, born in Holoby, Poland, and again died there, 1942. Another member of that family, Marim Dem, age 15, also born and died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Marim Etel Goikrach, age 11, born in Holoby, Poland, and also murdered there in 1942. Chaya Leah Goikrach, age 4, born and died 1942 in Holoby, Poland. Malka Goikrach, age 2, born and died in Holoby, Poland, 1942. And finally, Tsena Goikrach, age unknown, born and murdered 1942 in Holoby, Poland. May their names be for a blessing. May we always remember them and the good that they did on this earth while they were here.
Meyer Goffman, age 33, lived in USSR, died September 1st, 1944, in Warsaw, Poland. Yosef Levin, age 40, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Smolensk, Russia, USSR. Vladimir Litvak, age 46, lived in USSR, died 1944 in Austria. Minya Gershenzon, age 39, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia. Yuda Belkind, age 29, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Minsk, Belarusia. Kana Lerner, age 47, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Zyaslav Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine. Tilya Birstein, age 39, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Epitovka, Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine. Lisa Burstein, age 19, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Epitovka, Kamenets, Podolsky, Ukraine. Leba Steinberg, age 55, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Pinsk, Polesay, Poland. Matvey Margolin, age 33, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Baku, Azerbaijan. Abram Brodsky, age 36, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Stalingrad, Russia. Ilya Margolin, age 37, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Kharkov, Ukraine. Volko Sirota, age 67, died in USSR, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Odessa, Ukraine. Isaac Schwartzman, age 52, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Zinkov, Ukraine. Ida Brodsky, age 76, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Nikolaev, Ukraine. Itsko Brodsky, age 81, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Nikolaev, Ukraine. Raquel Schwartzman, age 47, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Zinkov, Ukraine. Yossi Schwartzman, age 18, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Zinkov, Ukraine. Ida Schwartzman, age 18, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Zinkov, Ukraine. Ava Strugak, age 18, lived in USSR, died May 3rd, 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia.
Eva Feinstein, age 22, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine. Eugenia Feinstein, age 56, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine. Meyer Feinstein, age 62, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine. Sarah Bender, age 44, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Kelmo. Israel Kostovsky, age 45, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Gadyak, Poltava, Ukraine. Lazar Schlossberg, lived in USSR, died October 29, 1941 in Smolensk, Russia. Lev Shtek, age 26, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Kyiv, Ukraine. Lev Sverdlov, age 32, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Poltava, Ukraine. Mendel Bram, age 60, lived in USSR, died October 15th, 1942 in Bar, Ukraine. Moshe Bram, age 62, lived in USSR, died October 15th, 1942 in Bar, Ukraine. Riva Moshel, age 40, lived in USSR, died October 15th, 1942 in Bar, Ukraine. Bintzian Katzman, age 46, lived in USSR, died October 15th, 1942 in Bar, Ukraine. Yanko Katzman, age 44, lived in USSR, died October 15th, 1942 in Bar, Ukraine. Genia Katzman, age 18, lived in USSR, died October 15th, 1942 in Bar, Ukraine. Berta Beletsky, age 40, lived in USSR, died October 13th, 1941 in Propetrovsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Ukraine. Leah Ehrlichman, age 19, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Majdansk. Meyer Borenstein, age 19, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Chaim Borenstein, age 25, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Skarjisko, Kielce, Poland. Kina Sherman, age 35, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Minsk, Belarus. Rosa Supolsnik, age 21, lived in USSR, died 1942, Lipovets, Vednitsa, Ukraine.
Sharna Fain, age 33, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Penchora, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Edna Rosenberg, age 32, lived in USSR, died in 1943, Pechora, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Era Reichik, age 37, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Kharkov, Ukraine. Udia Frischler, age 45, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Shalia Frischler, age 36, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Bluma Balin, age 53, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Leningrad, Russia. Rosa Taradash, age 23, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Pervomaisk, Ukraine. Benjamin Schwartzman, age 27, lived in USSR, died 1943 in Smolensk, Russia. Solomon Sherman, age 57, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Nikolaev, Ukraine. Yevgenia Sherman, age 55, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Nikolaev, Ukraine. Isaac Furman, age 35, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Kharkov, Ukraine. Samuel Schusterman, age 40, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Vitebsk, Belarus. Shamil Schwartzberg, age 21, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Kharkov, Ukraine. Beryl Flatt, age 21, lived in Lithuania, died 1941 in Utena, Lithuania. Israel Flatt, age 22, lived in Lithuania, died 1941 in Utena, Lithuania. Abram Flatt, age 46, lived in Lithuania, died 1941 in Utena, Lithuania. Jacob Kelmer, age 45, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Helmno. Bela Kelmer, age 22, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Helmno. Hirsch Kelmer, age 39, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Helmno. Sarah Feinstein, age 35, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Mariupol, Ukraine.
Rosa Goldberg, age 28, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Clara Levi, age 44, lived in USSR, died in December 1941 in Crimea, Russia. Kana Cohen, age 31, lived in USSR, died December 1941 in Crimea, Russia. Malka Gorovich, age 57, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Minsk, Belarus. Friedman Gurvich, age 60, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Minsk, Belarus. Getzel Gurvich, age 24, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Minsk, Belarus. Mikhail Schatz, age 30, lived in USSR, died November 1942 in Rygorodok, Ukraine. Sarah Schatz, age 24, lived in USSR, died November 1942 in Rygorodok, Ukraine. Leopold Gottman, age 36, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1942 in Majdanek. Rakhmil Schatz, age 54, lived in USSR, died November 1942 in Rygorodok, Ukraine. Strulik Borodevsky, age 20, lived in USSR, died September 1941 in Rygorodok, Ukraine. Golda Waldman, age 32, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Baruch Borodinatsky, age 30, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Kiev, Ukraine. Raquel Gishstein, age 51, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Fega Cohen, age 45, lived in USSR, died May in 1942 in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Sarah Bakshi, age 37, lived in USSR, died in December 1941 in Crimea, Russia. Misha Levi, age 51, lived in USSR, died in December 1941 in Crimea, Russia. Richard Reich, age 67, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1942 in Treblinka. Meryl Perel, age 49, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Esther Galper, age 43, lived in USSR, died in March 1942 in Leningrad, Russia. Idol Vaylor, age 47, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Lisa Vaylor, age 53, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Kana Gorokoshki, age 43, lived in USSR, died in Odessa, Ukraine in 1941. Sarolta Engel, age 45, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Istvan Engel, age 49, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Irene Goldman, age 44, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Laura Segelag, age 51, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Lichtenworth, Austria. Margit Szego, age 35, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Sandor Barna, age 39, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Buchenwald, Germany. Rosa Engel, age 67, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Berta Barna, age 56, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Josef Barna, age 59, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Shmuel Brandes, age 46, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Shaul Levenstein, age 78, lived in Poland and died in 1943 in Krakow, Poland. Shimon Brandes, age 43, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Yitzhak Liebenstein, age 34, lived in Poland, died in 1944 in Belgium. Raquel Levenstein, age 32, lived in Poland, died in 1943 in Belgium. Joseph Liebenstein, age 30, lived in Poland, died in 1944 in Janów, Poland. Moshe Levenstein, age 26, lived in Poland, died in 1939 in Krakow, Poland. Leopold Lehner, age 31, lived in Poland, died in 1944 in Mauthausen.
Nandor Kovacs, age 63, lived in Hungary, died October 17, 1945 in Budapest, Hungary. Imre Kovacs, age 31, lived in Hungary, died February 15, 1943, United Kingdom. Mehirt Lux, age 37, lived in Hungary, died January 15, 1943 in Ukraine, USSR. Laszlo Schlesinger, age 30, lived in Hungary, died October 21, 1944 in Budapest, Hungary. Erna Heller, age 39, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1945 in Auschwitz. Teres Grunwald, age 31, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Avram Siller, age 45, lived in Romania, died in 1941 in Transnistria. Talek Finkel, age 70, lived in Romania, died 1941, lived in Vinnytsia, Ukraine, USSR. Lev Gorodnik, age 45, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Moscow, Russia. Esther Persis, age 25, lived in the USSR, died in 1941 in Mogilev, Belarus, USSR. Frida Persis, age 20, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Mogilev, USSR. Benjamin Kaler, age 23, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Budapest, Hungary. Shalom Kaler, age 35, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Israel Kaler, age 28, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944 Auschwitz. Sarah Liberman, age 27, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Solomon Figelman, age 49, lived in USSR, died February 21st, 1942 in Leningrad, Russia, USSR. Naftali Kaler, age 69, lived in Hungary, died 1945 in Auschwitz. Yakov Mandel, age 37, lived in USSR, died in 1943 in Kharkov, Ukraine. Marcel Brand, age 30, lived in Poland, died in 1943 in Lwów, Poland. Mikhail Fredeltal, age 34, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Rostov-na-Donu, Russia, USSR.
Krak Aronovich, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Auschwitz. Raketa Alaluf, age 7, lived in Greece, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Moses Alba, age 12, lived in Poland, died November 6th, 1941 in Ravno-Wolin, Poland. Daniil Alperovich, age 6, lived in Lithuania, died July 25th, 1944 in Auschwitz. Luba Altarkovsky, age 7, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Dzержinsk, Zhytomyr, Ukraine, USSR. Sioma Altarkovsky, age 4, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Dzержinsk, Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Nico Altman, age 11, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Anshel Altman, age 2, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Treblinka.
Bela Altman, age 2, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Ephraim Alton, age 5, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Yakov Altman, age 16, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Poland. Malka Altman, age 10, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Shmuel Altman, age 16, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Srulik Altman, age 14, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Tibor Altman, age 13, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Hans Ament, age 10, lived in Austria, died 1944 in Auschwitz.
Yom Tov Angel, age 16, lived in Greece, died in 1942. Nelly Apter, age 11, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Rumbula, Latvia. Riva Arbitman, age 17, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Demenekva, Odessa, Ukraine. Chen Arensberg, age 15, lived in Latvia, died December 8, 1941 in Rumbula, Latvia. Gunther Aron, age 6, lived in Germany, died November 3, 1943 in Auschwitz. Hans Aron, age 11, lived in Germany, died November 3, 1943 in Auschwitz. Ilona Aron, age 11, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Agnes Aronovich, age 8, lived in France, died 1942 in Auschwitz.
Albert Aronovich, age 10, lived in France, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Clement Aronovich, age 12, lived in France, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Helene Aronovich, age 15, lived in France, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Kalman Aronovich, age 13, lived in France, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Nanette Arauz, age 14, lived in France, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Vova Oz, age 7, lived in USSR, died March 28, 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia, USSR. Eliezer Asher, age 8, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Siedlce, Poland. Itel Asner, age 10, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Radun, Nauergredek, Poland.
Solomon Attenslander, age 8, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Elizabeth Auschwitz, age 7, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1941 in Poland. David Auslander, age 10, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1942 in Majdanek. Herman Auslander, age 12, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1942 in Majdanek. Mendel Auslander, age 17, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Rachel Auslander, age 12, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Edith Auspitz, age 9, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1941 in Poland. Naomi Austerlitz, age 12, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz.
Esther Averbuch, age 17, lived in Romania, died July 8, 1941, in Valia lui Vlad, Bessarabia, Romania. Mania Averbuch, age 13, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Bar Vinica, Ukraine. Nor Bag, age 5, lived in Latvia, died November 30th, 1941 in Rumbula, Latvia. Frida Bain, age 5, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Majdanek. Menachem Bakon, age 15, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Eva Balan, age 6, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Peter Balan, age 13, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Lizar Balzam, age 13, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Chełmno.
Dora Bank, age 7, lived in USSR, died July 28, 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia. Sophia Bank, age 1, lived in USSR, died July 28, 1942 in Minsk, Belarusia. Galina Benkin, age 17, lived in USSR, died November 29, 1941 in Bagorovo, Crimea, Russia. Judith Bardos, age 8, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Vera Bardos, age 15, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Achshi Barth, age 8, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Bronia Baum, age 11, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Treblinka. Raphael Baum, age 7, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Treblinka.
Sarah Baum, age 16, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Marika Beck, age 10, lived in Yugoslavia, died June 1st, 1944 in Auschwitz. Ursula Becker, age 17, lived in Lithuania, died 1945 in Alkau, Pomerania, Greensmark, Germany. Carla Burnman, age 8, lived in Netherlands, died September 12, 1942 in Auschwitz. Rosalie Berman, age 4, lived in Netherlands, died September 10, 1942 in Auschwitz. Esther Becker, age 14, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Rzyski, Wola, Poland. Yehoshua Becker, age 16, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Rzyski, Wola, Poland. Gregory Benenson, age 8, lived in USSR, died September 18, 1941, in Krupki, Minsk, Belarusia, USSR.
Liba Benenson, age 2, lived in USSR, died September 18, 1941, in Krupki, Minsk, Belarusia. Nina Benenson, age 12, lived in USSR, died September 18, 1941, in Krupki, Minsk, Belarusia. Kasia Benenson, age 15, lived in USSR, died September 18, 1941, in Krupki, Minsk, Belarusia. Miriam Bennett, age 6, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Risha Bennett, age 12, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Treblinka. Aniuta Bordashevsky, age 7, lived in USSR, died in 1942 in Kryvyi-Zero, Odessa, Ukraine. Boris Bernstein, age 17, lived in USSR, died in 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine.
Sonia Bergelson, age 1, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Abadovka, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Berla Berger, age 5, lived in Yugoslavia, died June 1st, 1944 in Auschwitz. Edith Berger, age 12, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Ava Berger, age 9, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Clara Berger, age 17, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Clara Berger, age 14, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Misha Berger, age 11, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine. Misha Berger, age 4, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Odessa, Ukraine.
Gitla Grauman, age 41, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Sobibor. Moses Krems, age 52, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Janow, Lwow, Poland. Yosef Shamis, age 20, lived in the USSR, died June 27, 1944 in Vitebsk, Belarusia. Abraham Krems, age 26, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Janow, Poland. Chaim Einbinder, age 28, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Białystok, Poland. Simcha Einbinder, age 28, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Boruk Kling, age 48, lived in USSR, died July 12, 1943 in Khmelnytsia, Ukraine. Maria Kling, age 42,
lived in the USSR, died January 9, 1942, in Kemelk, Ukraine. Bajia Kling, age 44, lived in USSR, died January 9, 1942, in Kelmyk, Ukraine. Lieb Rachman, age 41, lived in the USSR, died 1941, in Kirovograd, Ukraine. Samuel Berman, age 55, lived in Poland, died 1943, in Warsaw, Poland. Benzion Kleiner, age 67, lived in Poland, died November 1, 1941, in Rovno, Wolin, Poland. Ruvim Peripsky, age 30, lived in the USSR, died 1942, in Orel, Russia. Yom Tov Penuel, age 46, lived in France, died June 22, 1942, in Auschwitz. Leonid Emeton, age 20, lived in the USSR, died 1943, in Orel, Russia. Mette Frischauer, age 47, lived in Germany, died October 1, 1942, in Poland. Aaron Luen, age 77, lived in the Netherlands, died January 14, 1943, in Auschwitz. Isaac Golenzer, age 55, lived in Poland, died 1943, in Auschwitz. Batsheva Albin, age 35, lived in Poland, died October 5, 1942, in Tarnopol, Poland. Lizer Katznelson, age 19, lived in USSR, died 1941, in Leningrad, Russia.
Clara Gonelles, age 2, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Minsk, Belarus. David Garden, age 7, lived in Poland, died May 8, 1942, in Belzec. Lily Gaspar, age 14, lived in Romania, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Ryszard Godansky, age 10, lived in Poland, died in 1942, in Belzec. Gershon Gekfinbaum, age 14, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Ludifor, Wolin, Poland. Mendel Gekfinbaum, age 12, lived in Poland, died in 1942, in Ludifor, Wolin, Poland. Nathan Gerber, age 13, lived in Poland, died 1944, in Brezany, Tarnopol, Poland. Esther Gerberger, age 3, lived in Hungary, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Ilona Gerberger, age 12, lived in Hungary, died in 1944, in Auschwitz. Lajos Gerberger, age 6, lived in Hungary, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Milja Gerbert, age 11, lived in USSR, died 1941, Odessa, Ukraine. Esfir Gelfan, age 17, lived in USSR, died October 21, 1941, in Rudina, Smolensk, Russia. Idek Gelfan, age 17, lived in Poland, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Libo Gelfan, age 15, lived in USSR, died January 31, 1942, in Berezino, Minsk, Belarus. Regina Gelfan, age 11, lived in Poland, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Tibor Gelman, age 16, lived in USSR, died September 30, 1941, in Abun Kamenets, Podersky, Ukraine. Tevi Gelman, age 16, lived in USSR, died September 19, 1941, in Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Yankur Gelman, age 2, lived in USSR, died September 19, 1941, in Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Meyer Gendelov, age 10, lived in Latvia, died December 8, 1941, in Rumbula, Latvia. Noemi Gendelov, age 4, lived in Latvia, died December 8, 1941, in Rumbula, Latvia.
Chaim Barenblut, age 69. David Iof, age 20. Fega Pekar, age 35. Boris Iof, age 49. Kaya Iof, age 31. Rachel Iof, age 38. Bella Iof, age 18. David Dodik, age 47. Aranka Ernst, age 36. Chinook Entin, age 63. Sora Tepper, age 56. Grigory Fogel, age 47. Anna Fogel, age 43. Leib Vaser, age 42. Israel Vaser, age 44. Mordechai Vaser, age 77. Rugal Vayner, age 18. Iosif Diskin, age 43. Ione Schmoishman, age 20. Nekhama Berezin, age 70.
David Rhea Boy, age 32, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Kiev, Ukraine. Raisa Rayaboy, age 32, lived in USSR, died 1941, Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Abraham Lisker, aged 40, lived in Poland, died 1945 in Poland. Josef Greenberg, aged 38, lived in USSR, died 1944 in Brno, Kazakhstan. Kaya Greenblatt, aged 23, lived in USSR, died 1942 as Rhenia, Ukraine. Ioni Greenblatt, aged 46, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Esnaya, Ukraine. Baisa Greenblatt, aged 45, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Ezranaya, Ukraine. Leip Shoiketman, aged 43, lived in Lithuania, died 1942 in Kaunas, Lithuania. Brandel Biner, aged 43, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Ida Denker, aged 40, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Khmelnyk, Ukraine. Haya Garfinkel, aged 30, lived in Poland, died October 7th, 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Miriam Davidson, aged 30, lived in Poland, died July 10th, 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Polina Schwartz, aged 20, lived in the USSR, died 1942 in Alexandria, Ukraine. Hanna Schwartz, aged 45, lived in the USSR, died 1942 in Alexandria, Ukraine. Rakhmael Polis, aged 40, lived in Poland, died 1940, Warsaw, Poland. Itzhak Polis, aged 30, lived in Poland, died 1941, Warsaw, Poland. Jakub Borenstein, aged 21, lived in Poland, died December 27th, 1940 in Arkhangelsk, Russia. Rakhmiel Borzenstein, aged 31, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Warsaw, Poland. Josef Brandon, aged 40, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Dobrosh, Belarusia. Petya Rygorovsky, aged 30, lived in the USSR, died 1942 in Odessa, Ukraine.
Riva Shapsa, age 22, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Poland. Kirsch Shapsa, age 20, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Poland. Zipporah Epstein, age 39, lived in Poland, died 1944, in Lodz, Poland. Feige Shapsa, age 50, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Auschwitz. Mans Perlovich, age 43, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Poland. Itzhak Perlovich, age 47, lived in Poland, died 1943, in Lodz, Poland. Solomon Aronchik, age 29, lived in the USSR, died June 12, 1942, in Stalino, Ukraine. Vladimir Bader, age 45, lived in the USSR, died October 8, 1941, in Zaporozhye, Ukraine. Moshe Steinberg, age 31, lived in Poland, died 1941, in Pinsk, Polesia, Poland. Malka Sapoznoknikov, age 26, lived in the USSR, died 1942, in Berdichev, Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Riva Sapozonikov, age 24, lived in the USSR, died 1942, in Berdichev, Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Zhukal Sapoznikov, age 20, lived in the USSR, died in 1942, in Berdichev, Zhytomyr, Ukraine. Bluma Vertib, age 45, lived in the USSR, died October 15, 1941, in Antonovka, Polisa, Belarus. Chaim Vertib, age 54, lived in the USSR, died October 15, 1941, Antonovka, Polis, Belarus. Abram Steinberg, age 22, lived in Poland, died 1941, in Pinsk, Poland. Yakov Vertib, age 29, lived in the USSR, died April 13, 1945, in Köln, Rhine Province, Germany. Nachum Steinberg, age 70, lived in Poland, died 1941, in Pinsk, Poland. Shaya Steinberg, age 35, lived in Poland, died in 1941, in Pinsk, in Poland. Mikhail Levitt, age 39, lived in the USSR, died in 1941, in Luga, Leningrad, Russia. Lana Steinberg, age 32, lived in Poland, died 1941, in Pinsk, Poland.
Avraham Osfeld, age 51, lived in Romania, died 1942 in Bershad, Ukraine, USSR. Salom Oster, age 32, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Stănești, Romania. Joshua Oslaka, age 44, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Jospa Ostrezga, age 41, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Warsaw, Poland. Shamil Oskula, age 38, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Frida Oppenheimer, age 54, lived in Germany, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Hanna Ofim, age 19, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Warsaw, Poland. Boruk Ordor, age 65, lived in Poland, died August 23rd, 1942, in Trisk, Volyn, Poland. Haya Orenstein, age 23, lived in Poland, died 1943, in Siedlce Ghetto. Miriam Ungar, aged 37, lived in Hungary, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Josef Iwanyer, age 54, lived in Romania, died 1942, in Kopygorod, Ukraine, USSR. Elizabeth Itzikzon, age 46, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Auschwitz. Shifra Ikowski, age 62, lived in Poland, died 1943, in Myszyniec, Poland. Jeno Ikovich, age 44, lived in Hungary, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Matilda Eisner, age 50, lived in Austria, died 1942, in Minsk, Belarusia. Elena Eiderman, age 47, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Babi Yar. Makala Edelstein, age 28, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Majdanek. Benzium Eisenbaum, age 44, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Buzim. Bejnad Buzim. Hirsch Eisenthal, age 42, lived in Romania, died 1942, in Bershit, Ukraine, USSR. Aharon Einstein, age 38, lived in Poland, died 1942, in Derezhin Ghetto.
Shia Orakovsky, age 57, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Kirovograd, Ukraine. Vanya Levine, age 30, lived in USSR, died November 7, 1941, in Minsk, Belarus. Ernst Bessinger, age 61, lived in Germany, died June 3, 1942, in Buchenwald, Germany. Burl Ginsburg, age 33, lived in USSR, died 1941, in Zlobin, Belarus. Jenda Fleischer, age 22, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944, in Auschwitz. Mendel Beckerman, age 46, lived in France, died 1942, in Auschwitz. Gavril Bershadusky, age 32, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Kharkov, Ukraine. Meyer Menist, age 37, lived in Netherlands, died December 31, 1942, in Auschwitz. Philip Menist, age 32, lived in Netherlands, died July 9, 1943, in Sobibor. Leendert Menist, age 49, lived in Netherlands, died July 9, 1943, in Sobibor. Emmanuel Menist, age 43, lived in Netherlands, died July 9, 1943, in Sobibor. Kana, age 29, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Drobitsky Yar, Ukraine. Shainir Segal, age 48, lived in Lithuania, died October 26, 1944, in Dachau. Rachel Back, age 58, lived in Austria, died October 19, 1944, in Auschwitz. Ernst Bach, age 62, lived in Austria, died October 9, 1944, in Auschwitz. Samuel Gross, age 33, lived in USSR, died December 17, 1944, in Leningrad, Russia. Aaron Schuyler, age 73, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Teofipol, Ukraine. Dora Schuyler, age 70, lived in USSR, died 1942, in Teofipol, Ukraine. Seema Fitterman, age 42, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Teofipol, Ukraine. Genia Kantorovich, age 32, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Grodyanka, Belarusia.
Magda Hirsch, age 13, lived in Czechoslovakia, died June 15, 1944 in Auschwitz. Mais Hirsch, age 9, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Manfred Hirsch, age 17, lived in Germany, died in 1943, Lodz, Poland. Marianne Hirsch, age 15, lived in Germany, died December 22nd, 1942 in Lodz, Poland. Missy Hirsch, age 13, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Paul Hirsch, age 4, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Tibor Hirsch, age 7, lived in Czechoslovakia, died June 15, 1944 in Auschwitz. Shindal Hirschberg, age 11, lived in Poland, died in 1943 in Auschwitz. Ruth Hirschfield, age 9, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Lottie Hosch, age 13, lived in Austria, died in 1941 in Minsk.
Wolf Hochberg, age 17, lived in Latvia, died 1941 in Riga, Latvia. Elmalech Hoffman, age 11, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Eva Hoffman, age 15, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Budapest, Hungary. Toby Hoffman, age 9, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1941 Auschwitz. Esther Hoffman, age 4, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1941 in Carpathian, Ruthenia, Czechoslovakia. E2 Hoffman, age 15, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1941 in Karthpan, Ruthenia, Czechoslovakia. Gitel Hoffman, age 6, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1941 in Carpathian, Ruthenia, Czechoslovakia. Chaim Hoffman, age 9, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Esther Hoffman, age 15, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Hizik Hoffman, age 15, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz.
Svea Hollander, age 12, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Yakov Hollander, age 10, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Harry Holstein, age 16, lived in Germany, died in Bergen, Germany. Oscar Hong, age 7, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1942 in Tomaszów, Lubia, Poland. Hamek Holmia, age 13, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Pinchas Homia, age 11, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Auschwitz. Feja Hoinkman, age 15, lived in Poland, died August 24th, 1942 in Triceg, Wilin, Poland. Moshe Hoinkman, age 10, lived in Poland, died August 24th, 1942 in Triceg, Wallin, Poland. Aaron Horn, age 11, lived in Poland, died January 1st, 1939 in Swilew, Poland. Barcha Horn, age 3, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka.
Idil Hoffman, age 17, lived in Stanisławka, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Joseph Hoffman, age 4, lived in Stanisławka, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Menzia Hoffman, age 11, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Itka Holder, age 17, lived in Poland, died April 24th, 1905 in Stanisławo, Poland. Mila Holder, age 9, lived in Poland, died November 2nd, 1942 in Kosas, Stanisławo, Poland. David Hollander, age 6, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Kia Hollander, age 4, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Rivka Hollander, age 8, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Samuel Hollander,
age 12, lived in Stanisławka, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Dubé Hollander, age 2, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz.
Burl Hirsch, age 12, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Dieter Hirsch, age 13, lived in Germany, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Dora Hirsch, age 11, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Dorothy Hirsch, age 9, lived in Germany, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Vike Hirsch, age 15, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Jared Hirsch, age 17, lived in Germany, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Joseph Hirsch, age 11, lived in Slovakia, died June 15, 1944 in Auschwitz. Judith Hirsch, age 4, lived in Slovakia, died June 15, 1944 in Auschwitz. Judith Hirsch, age 14, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Leah Hirsch, age 10, lived in Slovenia, died June 15, 1944 in Auschwitz.
Ari Gottsman, age 12, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Ellie Gottsman, age 16, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944, Auschwitz. Leibish Gottsman, age 10, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944, Auschwitz. Libby Gottsman, age 7, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944, Auschwitz. Mary Gottlieb, age 12, lived in Latvia, died November 29, 1941, in Riga, Latvia. Shoma Gottlieb, age 12, lived in Latvia, died November 29, 1941, in Rambala, Latvia. Leib Godzik, age 10, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Maurice Graskar, age 9, lived in France, died August 21st, 1942 in Auschwitz. Therese Graskar, age 12, lived in France, died August 19th, 1942 in Auschwitz. Claudine Grasser, age 4, lived in France, died August 19th, 1942, Auschwitz.
Wolf Gumplowitz, age 14, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Manchika Gurin, age 3, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Minsk, Belarusia. Yakov Gurman, age 15, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Uman, Kiev, Ukraine. Asher Gurvich, age 5, lived in Lithuania, died October 28, 1941 in Kaunas, Lithuania. Mina Gurvich, age 7, lived in Lithuania, died October 28, 1941 in Kaunas, Lithuania. Reuven Gurvich, age 10, lived in Lithuania, died October 28, 1941, Kaunas, Lithuania. Badan Gurwitz, age 1, lived in Poland, died 1941 in Ponery, Vilno, Poland. Ander Gut, age 15, lived in Hungary, died 1945 in Auschwitz. Yuri Gut, age 9, lived in Hungary, died 1945 in Auschwitz. Leib Gutkin, age 17, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Osevia, Vitebsk, Belarusia.
Izia Gruber, age 5, lived in USSR, died 1942 in Netsvy, Kamenets-Podolsky, Ukraine. Kanta Grunenbaum, age 7, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Agnes Grunhutz, age 3, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Eva Grunwald, age 4, lived in Czechoslovakia, died 1942 in Majdanek. Micha Skrin, age 17, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Brunech Greenberg, age 1, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Esther Gunzler, age 6, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Gino Gwensler, age 11, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Jude Gwensler, age 3, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Simon Gumpelwitz, 11, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz.
Daniel Glazer, age 6, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Dolnik, Odessa, Ukraine, USSR. Isaac Glazer, age 2, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Dolnik, Odessa, Ukraine. Isaac Glazer, age 1, lived in the USSR, died 1941, Dolnik, Odessa, Ukraine. Lilia Glazer, age 10, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Dolnik, Odessa, Ukraine. Rachel Glazer, age 17, lived in the USSR, died 1941 in Onoye, Kamenets-Podolsky, Ukraine. Erika Globus, age 8, lived in Poland, died April 25th, 1943, in Warsaw, Poland. Sabina Glowixar, age 17, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Moses Glock, age 16, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1945 in Auschwitz. Antel Glucksmann, age 7, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Rizna, Bessarabia, Romania. Rochelle Goberman, age 17, lived in USSR, died July 11th, 1941 in Minsk, Belarusia, USSR.
Ispan Haas, age 14, lived in Hungary, died June 16, 1944 in Auschwitz. Luba Haber, age 5, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Marco Halian, age 17, lived in Greece, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Golda Hager, age 8, lived in Poland, died September 2nd, 1942 in Stanisław, Poland. Nahama Hager, age 14, lived in Poland, died October 20th, 1942 in Belzec. Taube Hamer, age 4, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Transnistria. Arnold Handelsman, age 15, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Erika Handelsman, age 7, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Robert Handfis, age 8, lived in France, died August 19, 1942 in Auschwitz. Chava Handwerker, age 13, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Sobibor. Ada Hartman, age 16, lived in Poland, died October 24th in 1942 in Warsaw, Lwów, Poland. Yechiel Hartman, age 7, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Agnes Hartman, age 12, lived in Hungary, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Gabor Hauer, lived in Hungary, age 16, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Laszlo Hauer, age 11, lived in Hungary, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Eva Havas, age 14, lived in Romania, died June 5th, 1944 in Auschwitz. Julika Havas, age 8, lived in Hungary, died July 7th, 1944 in Auschwitz. Isaac Hecht, age 8, lived in Poland, died in Wrocław, Tarnopol, Poland. Moshe Hecht, age 15, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Russia. Nachman Hecht, age 17, lived in Poland, died in 1945 in Auschwitz.
Avraham Held, age 15, lived in Poland, died August 26, 1942, in Rotnow, Volyn, Poland. Joseph Held, age 17, lived in Poland, died August 26, 1942, in Rotnow, Volyn, Poland. Nechma Held, age 13, lived in Poland, died August 26, 1942, in Rotnow, Volyn, Poland. Pei Held, age 15, lived in Poland, died August 26, 1942, in Rotnow, Volyn, Poland. Sarah Held, age 17, lived in Poland, died August 26, 1942, in Rotnow, Volyn, Poland. Ida Helfer, age 12, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Tarnow, Krakow, Poland. Mina Helfer, age 17, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Tarnow, Krakow, Poland. Yakov Helfer, age 2, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Tarnow, Krakow, Poland. Benzion Hellman, age 13, lived in Latvia, died 1941 in Vesti, Latvia. Mata Hellman, age 11, lived in Latvia, died 1941 in Vesti, Latvia.
Inge Goldschmidt, age 15, lived in Germany, died July 28, 1944 in Minsk, Belarusia, USSR. Boria Goldscheider, age 5, lived in USSR, died October 15, 1942 in Yalshkov, Vinnytsia, Ukraine, USSR. Adelia Goldschmidt, age 13, lived in USSR, died September 20, 1942 in Yalshkov, Vinnytsia, Ukraine, USSR. Misha Goldschmidt, age 15, lived in USSR, died September 20th, 1942, in Yolshkov, Vinnytsia, Ukraine, USSR. Yankel Goldschmidt, age 16, lived in USSR, died September 20th, 1942, in Yolshkov, Vinnytsia, Ukraine, USSR. Mira Goldstein, age 11, lived in USSR, died 1941, in Belgrove, Krim, Russia, USSR. Nellie Goldstein, age 8, lived in USSR, died 1941 in Begrovo, Krim, Russia, USSR. Chana Goldstein, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Ethel Goldstein, age 14, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz. Joseph Goldstein, age 11, lived in Poland, died 1944 in Auschwitz.
Chaim Herskowitz, age 11, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Chelmno. Herschel Herskowitz, age 14, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Chelmno. Gidol Herslikowitz, age 12, lived in Poland, died in 1942 in Treblinka. Jacob Herzig, age 6, lived in Poland, died April 13th, 1943 in Sambor, Lwów, Poland. Malka Herzig, age 13, lived in Romania, died 1941 in Sudu, Bukovina, Romania. Ivan Hilf, age 7, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Stefan Hilf, age 14, lived in Czechoslovakia, died in 1944 in Auschwitz. Manfred Hilsenrad, age 3, lived in Romania, died 1944 in Omsk, Russia, USSR. Mendel Heinz, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1943 in Zbaris, Tarnopol, Poland. Bella Hipser, age 12, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka.
Mano Goldstein, age 17, lived in Hungary, died October 6, 1944 in Auschwitz. Moshe Goldstein, age 10, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Shmuel Goldstein, age 17, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Auschwitz. Bella Goldstein, age 14, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Majdanke. Pesa Goldstein, age 17, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Majdanke. Shifra Goldstein, age 6, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Majdanke. Yashanuhu Goldsweiser, age 15, lived in Poland, died 1942 in Treblinka. Ryzik Goldswer, age 16, lived in Poland, died August 20th, 1942 in Treblinka. Lisa Goldsman, age 8, lived in the USSR, died August 19th, 1941 in Libar Zhytomyr, Ukraine, USSR. Yakov Gorshtein, age 17, lived in the USSR, died September 10th, 1943 in Latin Venistisa, Ukraine, USSR.